Crashing has its first Me Too moment as the show takes on the sexist culture of stand-up comedy. We're talking all about it here on the Crashing Aftershow, so stay tuned.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crashing Aftershow here on AfterBuzz TV. Today on the show, we are covering Season 3, Episode 4, entitled MC, Middler, Headliner, and we're talking all about stand-up culture. If this is your guys' first time tuning into AfterBuzz TV, we're an after-show network, so we will be covering HBO's Crashing. So if you haven't seen Episode 4, go back and watch it, then come back to us. Us is me, Jeff Graham, and I'm joined by two brilliant co-hosts. I want to start with Elena.
Oh, hey!
Elena, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you guys for having me.
I watched the episode actually today, if I'm being honest, and I started panicking because I thought, okay, this is a great episode all about how dudes sometimes patriarchally mansplain comedy culture, so I'm not just going to let Josh and I take this episode on. And Elena, it's perfect because not only are you a great host, but you do some stand-up as well. So yes.
It's a very interesting time, too, in comedy culture, so this is a very fun episode to talk about, I think.
I think so, too. Very timely, and I was impressed by their take. And Josh, we're happy to have you as well.
I'm happy to be here, Jeff.
Josh was just telling me about the best weekend of his life.
The best weekend of my life. Palm Springs.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
For those of you guys who, I know you all podcast, so you'll have to check out Straight Talk with Ross Matthews.
with Ross Matthews on iTunes. It's free. Go download it. I had the time of my life. We went down there for a Palm Springs weekend. We met up with some Straight Talkers. It's a nice community.
Nice. Well, the fans want to hear about our thoughts on Crashing, guys. So not only will we be covering the episode, but we do have some news and gossip, and I have a little stand-up feature that we'll be looking at later in the show, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. But I really want to hear everyone's overall thoughts on the episode. And Elena, because you are our lovely guest, I would love to start with you. What do you think of the episode?
I really, really liked this episode. I feel like it definitely still stayed within tone of the show. It didn't get too heavy, which it could have gone,
You're right.
I think, really kind of almost too dark.
A drama.
And I feel like this was very, very well written. I'll be honest, I wish that there were some more women in the writing room besides just asking Jamie Lee for her input a little bit because it was written by 3 men and directed by a man.
I saw that.
But other than that, I mean, I still feel like they did a really good job, and Judd Apatow, I think, is really addressing kind of how everything is changing right now and how the comedy scene is changing. I thought this was a really, really well-delivered take.
Josh, what do you think?
I totally agree. I actually wasn't expecting that payoff. I knew some type of payoff was coming, but I wasn't expecting it to be that sort of message.
Yeah.
It completely blindsided me in a very, very good way. I knew that there would be some type of confrontation, but I didn't know it would be that. I'm glad it was.
Yeah, sometimes Josh and I, Elena, will talk about how this show is so enjoyable and it's so breezy, but sometimes it can feel kind of conflictless, where it's just like you're just kind of watching Pete walk through the city with his girlfriend, which is nice because a lot of TV is so heavy-hitting with conflict. It can be nice to have some escapist, breezy television, but they were not afraid to dig into some real cringe this episode, which I really appreciated. I agree with you guys. I thought this was an awesome episode of TV, and one thing I love about Crashing is how lived in and realistic it feels. Like, rather than having this, there's a version of this show where there's a really dramatic sexual assault, and that's super important and that's super valid, but that's not always how the patriarchy of comedy works. Sometimes it's in words and it's in tone and just the things that are said. So I think this was addressing a very important and sometimes under-discussed component of sort of douchey masculine comedy culture. It's really well written. I was surprised to see there was no above-the-line female credit on this episode either, Elena. It's interesting. 4 of the episodes this season are directed by Gillian Robespierre, who directed a movie called Obvious Child. Did you ever see that movie? It's got Jenny Slate, and then she recently directed another movie called Landline, starring Edie Falco and also Jenny Slate. So, she's this brilliant female director. I'm kind of like, why not put her on this episode? If she's directing half the season.
I feel like Judd Apatow's talked about this a little bit, about how he's trying to keep everything very, he doesn't look at gender when he's filling the writer's room and when he's filling the director's role, which to some degree is good, and to some degree it's like, okay, but if these are the issues that you're talking about, it would be nice to have a little bit more female perspective instead of just Jamie saying, well, I feel like Allie, and the way that I would portray this character would be like this, to have a little bit of that impact, I think, more throughout would have been kind of nice, but I still think that they really delivered.
They really delivered. It's just that thing where credit does matter, and I know Beth Stelling is in that writer's room, who's a comic I really like, and Jamie Lee has credited writing on this episode. So it's like just having that even like additional credit, I think that it just seems like it matters. I don't know.
Because they probably wrote that. They've had to have some type of, even the concept of the episode, it wouldn't surprise me if they came up with the concept of the episode.
If the female's in that, I'm sure. You know, it doesn't feel like that originates necessarily. It's not the first instinct for a straight white dude to have that idea for an episode. I mean, who knows? But it just reminds me of, I don't know if you guys watch Master of None, but the Thanksgiving episode, which is one of my favorite episodes of comedy TV ever written. Lena pitched it to Aziz, and he started writing, and he's like, I can't do this alone. Like, just write it with me. And I don't know. I'm glad you brought that up, Elena, because it was a little weird.
I did think it's kind of interesting, too, even you mentioning Aziz, because this season even opened up with Jason saying, you know, well, business is booming because the Comedy Cellar's right around the corner, and everybody wants to see if one of the disgraced comics is going to show up for it. And it's like, that was a direct dig because Louis C.K. and Aziz both showed up almost directly after their allegations. I mean, I won't get into my whole thing. I feel like the Aziz situation was blown out of proportion.
Mishandled.
Yeah. I'm like, but I won't get into all that now.
Right.
But I did just think it was kind of interesting that it felt like it has been kind of leading up to this a little bit. There have been little references, but to have a whole episode that's like, this is kind of addressing the toxic masculinity that not only affects all the females or I mean, really the two females that we see interacting with Jason in this episode, but also himself and how it's this whole culture, this whole like Joe Rogan,
Joe Rogan, that's a good way.
Like I mean, it's like it just even when he like comes out his whole intro like, what's up, effers,
Right.
Can I curse on this show? No, right?
I think we lose iTunes viewers if we do. So I know none of you guys have a problem with that for it because obviously you're watching Crashing on HBO. But we will tame it down for the podcast, NPR style.
When I quote, I just want to like.
Yeah, I know what you mean. When you're quoting directly, it feels so gross.
I feel weird when I'm like, "What up, effers?" You know, like Joe Rogan does.
Yeah, for the one person who was going to report us, now you can't. So there you go.
But even like the Andrew Dice Clay type reference and everything, like it's this whole idea that's been kind of this subgenre of comedy where it's this tough guy masculine like, oh, I'm gonna hate on you know, different things and just I'm not racist but type setups and the I'm not sexist but and then that whole mentality of the all right, time to go do some push-ups, like it's almost become like a caricature that comedians who are still trying to find their way and even after, you know, 22 years are still kind of looking to fill that niche because they don't realize comedy is constantly evolving and changing, and that character may not be relevant anymore.
For sure.
So then what do you do when you've had 22 years of this and now you have to change your whole act and personality?
That's so well said. I want to save that conversation because I think there's so much to unpack there. No, but I'm so glad you brought it up because there is an element of tragedy in this episode that I think you're like touching on that I want to get to. But before we talk about some of the really juicy stuff in this episode, we're going to talk about another juicy scene in a different way, and that's Pete and Kat.
Oh, that's a pun that even I am like,
nice.
It was a little,
nice transition. Nice transition.
Thank you.
We'll give you that one.
We have to talk about the Pete and Kat of it all, though, because I've been loving Pete's kind of sexual awakening this season.
Yeah.
It's kind of adorable. And we get to watch Pete and Kat have FaceTime sex, which, first of all, what a smart take on this, that there was, like, connectivity issues. Like, that was just a hilarious, almost like a sketch premise that really played well.
Yeah.
How'd you guys feel about Pete and Kat's technologically impaired phone sex?
I thought it was hilarious, and I felt bad for Kat at the end of it because she was so close.
I know.
Like, she was so close.
Just finish it, Pete. Do your job, man.
But I think it's the first time that, like, I think Pete got a sense of, like, okay, this is not going to be sunshine and rainbows the whole time.
Yes.
Like, this is going to be a relationship, and I'm going to have to fulfill her needs and not always be a jokester. It's not always going to be 100% kidding around and all fun.
Right.
So I think it's going to lead into something next episode.
Yeah, are we worried about Pete and Kat?
No, I'm not worried, but
I'm not worried about Pete and Kat. I think this is probably the healthiest relationship.
Yes, absolutely.
He's had, you know?
Yeah.
And I do like, though, that it has this parallel of this, like, female-male connectivity issue that's then echoed throughout the episode. Wow. And it's this, you know, whole...
Really
She's good.
Like, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, so we literally had a connectivity problems. We're not on the same page. And now where your headspace is isn't where mine is. And it's causing problems because what you think is funny, I don't think is funny because that's not where I'm at.
Wow.
and if you're not going to take the time to address that, because he even says, he's like, well, after I come, like, sex is just kind of done for me.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, that's a problem, dude. If your girlfriend is still like, I'm here.
Yeah,
so
it's
it
a
kind
really
of
good
like
point.
parallels like this sexual disconnect that's then also reflected in a disconnect between the sexes. Even
It's almost like Pete is just like, there's like a 5% patriarchal element there too. And of course, Pete's sort of patriarchal approach to this is much less intense than Jason's.
It's innocent and ignorant.
It's innocent and ignorant, but it's still his inability to like recognize the sexual validity of women. And part of that's because he grew up in such a Christian culture. He's never learned that women are also sexual people. You know, he's never, and we're finding like last episode, I think it's the first time Pete's had sex twice in one day. And actually Madeline Wise, who guested last week, talked about this, how Pete doesn't have the ability yet to take sexuality seriously because he's still treating it like a bit, like it's a joke to him. And this was the first time I really appreciated she kind of called him out and said, like, I love that you're funny, but like this matters, and like don't make this a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so it's not a joke either. I mean, sex is an important part to your relationship.
Definitely.
So
yeah.
So I'll be really interested. I'm not worried about Pete and Kat, but I do think it's the first time Pete's dated a non-comic, and he has a lot to learn about what it means to truly engage with the person you're with. Because I think sometimes you watch two comics date and their entire relationship is like the foundation is bits, and he's never had the ability to like move to the next level with someone,
right?
Because it's so easy to lean into a joke, and there's a lot more Pete and Kat to come, I think. Any more thoughts on Pete and Kat before we move on?
No, I just think that's the first. I think if he was on Cloud 9, he's not so much on it anymore. He's probably thinking a little bit that he has to be more attentive to her needs, and this is a relationship, and he's going to have to be just a better boyfriend or just be more attentive.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was surprised that at no point he was like, by the way, my ex-girlfriend's here. Like, that would have been a nice heads up to your current girlfriend. Like,
That's true.
It's not weird, but
she is here, and we're staying in the same house. We should definitely talk about if there's going to be a Kat, Jamie, Pete moment, but we can save that for predictions. Speaking of what else is to come, Josh, tell the fans a little bit more about our network and kind of what we're doing here at
All right, so AfterBuzz TV. Listen, we are on iTunes. We are on YouTube. What is YouTube? But YouTube, iTunes. It's very important that you give us 5 stars on iTunes. This is how we keep the lights on in this building. This is how we know you want to hear Crashing After Show. So go to iTunes, subscribe to AfterBuzz, specifically this show. Give us 5 stars. Give us a review. Tell us how much you love us so we can keep this after show going. And if you want, we're also on YouTube. We have different subgenres. We have drama. We have sports and wrestling. What else we have, Jeff? I'm not really sure. We have sci-fi. We have a lot of different genres. So
animation.
Animation's another one. So if you don't like sports but you like animation, subscribe to our animation channel. I would subscribe to all of them. They're all great. Once again, iTunes, 5 stars, YouTube, like, subscribe, all that good stuff.
It's the best, guys. Don't forget, we're the ESPN of TV talk. So we bring you all the nerdiness you need to get through your week if you're as obsessed with television as we are, and we are. Okay, so in terms of the rest of the episode, I kind of want to break it down into what was happening off stage and what was happening kind of on stage. Okay. So right away, there's this really kind of funny power dynamic that's established with Jason and Pete. Like the way the show uses heavy metal music to kind of like put Pete in his place. This was really funny to me. How do you guys feel like you got to see like Pete and Jason's relationship with this power dynamic?
Well, I mean, Jason definitely was, I guess, the dominant one in the relationship. The music showed that. And Pete, he's just a passive person in general. So I think the music just amplified it a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's kind of interesting that Pete gets the headliner because it shows that you don't have to be that type of person or that type of personality to actually come out on top. That's how I took it at the end of the day. So it was interesting.
Yeah.
It was funny, too. Like the heavy metal. I'm glad you brought that up.
I think, it just kind of set up his whole mentality. I mean, he even says, he's like, we'll get there when we get there. The show starts when we get there. We're the ones filling the house. It's an attitude.
Oh, yeah, from the beginning,
If you're going to do this for as long, like, you're going to do this for a while, you got to learn to relax. Like, just has this ridiculous pseudo-confidence.
And arrogance.
Yeah, that's just gotten, like, I mean... And you got to pay your dues, man. Like, I drove around Jay Moore and had to listen to Who Let the Dogs Out. And I'm like, okay, well, that's significantly better than like,
Well, Elena, I'm so glad you said pseudo-confidence because I think Dov Davidoff, who plays Jason on this show, gave us this like really vulnerable performance. And I think like we got to see a lot of moments where he's really dealing with a ton of insecurity. I saw it especially when he first got to the club and like was really sort of personally offended that the bouncer didn't know who he was. I feel we got moments all throughout this episode where we see a ton of insecurity and a sense that his type of comedy and maybe even his personhood just isn't relevant anymore.
It does kind of seem like that's the thing, is he's holding on to this old comedy, which that was the case, you know.
Yeah.
Like he even says, you know, it's great to get out of the city if this is your first time doing one of these weekend gigs, because here it's not like the city where it's so busy and, you know, there's so much entertainment. Here they're just grateful that you're here. Like he just has always had the mentality of he's the superstar when he shows up here. He's filling all the stage. He's not expecting the people to be there because it's free tickets on a mailer. He's thinking it's because they see my face on that poster.
Right.
They want to come see me. It's what validates everything that he's done for the past 2 decades. And then now that this validation is slowly being chipped away, the only way he knows to react is to kind of retaliate and go even more with his undercutting, with his trying to make Allie look bad, with his hitting on Deborah when she's like, back off. Just it just seems like it's this really sad grasping at anything that he used to have, like his whole mentality of this used to be fun. And the kind of misguided notion of, okay, well, I'm just going to get a slap on the wrist, I'll clean it up for a couple months, and then come back, and it'll be just like it's always been. And he keeps making these references, like, when this PC crap is over and you guys wake up from this, like, see what happens. And it's like, dude, this isn't a bell that's not going to get unrung.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody validated him whatsoever. Not a single person this episode validated his behavior, and that drove him crazy. And the whole PC culture thing, I mean, I know we're probably going to get into a little bit, but to me, it's like, it's not so much the PC culture, it's his misunderstanding of what is going on in the world and what's right. And it's kind of frustrating as someone who loves stand-up comedy when a comedian blames the audience for a joke failing.
Right.
I mean, Allie kind of led to it at the end of the episode where she's like, hate speech is not, you know, it's not comedy. It's not comedy, but it's your job as a comedian to be funny. There is racial humor. There is humor between the genders. You can have sexual humor. There's ways to do it. You just have to be funny. It's not funny.
I so agree, and I want to start to get into these sets now because I think the show really addressed that.
Yeah.
Because what was so interesting about this was, one, Jason gave the same set twice, but the way the show framed it was through 2 different filters. And it kind of served, I was reading a little bit of coverage online, but it sort of served this allegory as to what's happening with audiences, where, you know, maybe this was okay 10 years ago, but when it's repositioned through a new filter, when Allie goes up there and gives a very, very funny set and a fresh take on consent, not only is it gross to see this new set, but it's just unfunny. And what I really appreciated about the show was it addressed just what you're saying, Josh, where your job as a comic is to be funny. Yeah. And Allie took on the exact same topic that Jason took on in a way that was sharp, but it was also really funny. I mean, the idea that women love questions, I think the way she delivered it was, can I have sex with you? Oh, yeah, now you can have sex with me. It's like, that's a really funny joke. Yeah. And it shows how we've evolved. I just thought this was such a smart way to address the way we're evolving as an audience.
Right. And also to show that there are differences between white people and black people or whatever. And there are funny ways to express that. There are funny ways to express the differences in sexualities. There are ways to do it. It doesn't mean that these things are taboo to talk about.
Right.
And that's my biggest beef with people who complain about PC culture. They automatically assume, oh, we can't talk about this anymore. It's no, you can. There's just a right way to do it. And Allie showed the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Elena, how did you feel that we saw Jason set twice?
I loved that they showed the direct juxtaposition of the two because, I mean, first of all, you will have the nights where something hits and something doesn't, but to show his confidence drop immediately in the second set. Like, it was the delivery, too, that was a big part of it. Like, you see him when he's making the very ill-advised Mexican birth control joke, and he's reaching into his pocket and getting out his notes that, you know, you can tell that he wasn't expecting to have to use. And it's like, oh, I'm grasping at whatever I can because this isn't working, and didn't have the kind of intelligence that you would think that you would have after 22 years of, okay, my topics were torpedoed in his speech, like his language. What do I do now that's different? You would think that he would have enough of other things to fill in. Because honestly, I mean, I personally feel like a lot of comics will, myself included, will dismiss certain materials after a certain number of years because it's like, this isn't really relevant anymore. Like, this isn't...
It's outdated.
Yeah, and it's perfect that this really took on the idea of the PC culture and kind of the idea, like, Jerry Seinfeld saying this is what's ruining comedy. This is, it's taking away, and not just him, but, Chris Rock, all these big comedians who have a problem with it. Kevin Hart, yeah, who say, like, PC culture, even Lisa Lampanelli, like, this isn't exclusively men that are saying these things.
Yeah.
But this idea that, okay, well, I mean, you look at SNL, where it's like things from certain seasons, you go way back, it's not funny now because it's not relevant. But at the time, it was hilarious. Comedy has to evolve. That's what makes it funny, is that it's relevant. And so if you are so stuck in the past trying to force these jokes to work that don't work, then that is a reflection on you as a comedian.
Right.
And I think that that's kind of the statement, because Judd Apatow has even come out and been like, I don't see this as a problem. I see it as a challenge. Like, this is for you to be smarter and be clever and come up with new things.
Right.
I mean, I see, like, if you have the opportunity for a new challenge, you should jump in instead of trying to force things.
Totally.
And I think that was kind of the message.
That's the brilliance of a good stand-up, is someone who can evolve. And that's why I was so glad the show didn't write off the topic of consent as a premise, because Allie got up there and gave us a brilliant 5 minutes about consent. So just like you were saying, Josh, it's the job of a comic to look at any important hot topic in the world and bring a take that is fresh and will resonate with audiences.
Yeah.
It's like, at worst, I don't want to say at worst, but as much as you can complain about offensiveness and derogatory speech, tired material just won't play. It won't be funny. And that's what you have to do as a comic. And as cringy as it was to hear Jason give this terrible tired material, it was just as cringy because it was super unfunny,
Yeah.
So super interesting.
I also thought it was really interesting, too, that Allie was one passed up for headliner, and then the notes were, okay, you need to smile more, you need to be more enthusiastic. Even I loved the moment when they were like, the comedian, and her face, like, oh, God, because, I feel like every female comedian has been there. I literally was introduced one time where they were like, not only is she really pretty, she's also my type. And I was like, what the like, what?
Right.
Gross.
Like, ew, dude. Like, now I'm throwing out my whole set and just making it about how gross you are as a person. And then just knowing that I'm never doing this show again.
Yeah.
But, like, I loved that moment that they even have, okay, here's the card. You're going to do the announcements. And here's the jokes that we wrote for you to make it easier. And even Jason's whole, like, tits and teeth remark, where it's like, okay, this is clearly him lashing out because he was just demoted, which she points out. But it's just these subtle attacks.
On women. And the cards, too, I took that as, like, women can't be funny, so therefore we're going to do this for you. Because that's still kind of a stigma to me. I mean, I don't believe it, but you talk to a lot of men, they think women can't be funny. It's impossible to be funny.
It's crazy. And now that I think about it, this episode did such a good job of just kind of cooking the theme of patriarchy throughout every subplot. Like what she mentioned with Pete and Kat. Like how the way Jamie was treated, she can't be a headliner, she has to read this material. It was such a subtle way to sort of address the many layers of sexism that we see in this industry that are hopefully getting at least broken down little by little. But it's something Pete needs to figure out, too, because it was there a little bit.
Yeah, and Pete's is interesting, too, because I consider myself an ally. I'm sure you do, Jeff, as well.
No, I don't like women.
But as a man, I've come to realize that sometimes subconsciously maybe I do things that I'm not aware of. And it's not on purpose. Like, I'm sure Pete's wasn't on purpose. I don't think Pete is chauvinist at all. But, he didn't, in that moment, didn't recognize what he was doing. And it shows that we need to educate ourselves. We have to be more aware. And I think this whole episode was just an homage to that, which was pretty cool.
Definitely. I want to talk about one of the most challenging scenes in the episode, which is, of course, when Jason comes off stage and he's been having this, quote, flirty relationship with this waitress who was professional and doing her job, but obviously wasn't reciprocating his feelings. And there's this really uncomfortable moment where he comes on to her and she doesn't take it. And it was such an empowering scene to watch her just shut him down. Elena, I have to ask you first, how did you react to this scene?
I mean, I thought that it was really, really well done. I mean, her reaction, honestly, was kind of tame in juxtaposition with him literally grabbing at her repeatedly and saying, like, just really derogatory things about her lower back tattoo and calling her, like, dirty and, like, all these things that... To her, I think it was great that it showed her whole speech where it's like, this isn't just you hitting on me. You are all of these comics who come in. You are just one of this entire stereotype. Like, you are just another leather jacket that's in here thinking that you can get away with this because you assume that you have all of these comedy groupies. And it's something that you do see a lot firsthand. So, I mean, it was kind of cool to see this empowering moment when a lot of times there are situations that you can tell people don't want, like waitresses don't want to have to go into the green room because this mentality still exists and they don't want to lose their job. So they just go, and leave.
Right.
So to get to see her kind of shove some drinks in the face, I was hoping that it would be like when he's like, okay, well, don't tell Graham.
Right.
I gotta make sure I keep my job. That she just immediately is like,
right. Which she might have. We don't necessarily.
And when she said that, it's almost like he's the only threat to her. Like, even after she cursed him out, she threw the drinks at him, like, he was still only afraid of what the guy would do, not so much of what she would do or her in general or what he was doing whatsoever. What got him in check was the threat of another man disciplining him. Which
a professional. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was this whole episode was just
really good.
Yeah.
Gavin,
everything.
not Grant. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I believed you. It's fine. I don't think too many of our audience.
I was gonna say Greg. So
there's someone in the audience who's like, thank God she corrected herself. Our one
that one dumb woman.
This is why we can't have women on the panel.
We let a woman join for 1 week. She messes up the name. This led to what I think was a really powerful ending as well. And of course, we have that button, which we'll quickly address. But this argument between Allie and Jason. Again, the reason I loved this so much was because there's a version of this scene where Jason comes across as really aggro and douchey, but in this portrayal by Dov Davidoff, he was like insecure and broken and just like, despite what he was saying, you could see in his eyes that this was a realization that like he's done. He's no longer relevant, and he was heartbroken is how I saw this. I don't know what you guys think, but
yeah, I mean, I saw that too. I also saw the frustration. I don't want to get political, but like a lot of it like relates to like, I wouldn't say Trump supporters, but a lot of conservatives, like this whole white privilege thing, and it's hard to be a straight white man.
Right.
And like as a guy who's from the Bronx, Puerto Rican, like I look at that, I'm like, dude, come on. And Allie had the same exact reaction. Like, this is not about being white. This is about like you spewing hate speech, and it's time for you to recognize that.
Right.
And I feel like, you know, there's still outlets out there. There are still public figures, whether it's the president. I don't want to get political, but like there's still like avenues where people like Doug Jason in the show can go to kind of validate their feelings, and I feel like we need to break that down. And I'm glad that this show addressed that, especially with Pete being white and Allie being white. Like, it wasn't like a black guy who said, no, it's not. But it was like two white people who put him in check. And I actually appreciated that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it's like you even see in his stand-up, like even when he's his super confident, first round, when he says, I don't know how to be a man sometimes. I don't know how to speak to women. And it's like comedians are saying truths, their own truths, just in a funny way. And when you break that down, if you just read it, that's a sad statement. And it's the truth, because he's been told his whole life, this is how men act. This is how you're supposed to be. Like, you are supposed to have this attitude. And it's this toxic masculinity that he doesn't realize is harming even him. And he's perpetuating it when, if he would just take the time to break it down and reevaluate what he's doing, instead of just the mentality of a slap on the wrist and I'm right back at it.
Right.
Like, there's no evolution, there's no character development in this that I think is important and I think is intentional, because most of these comedians, that's why they're stuck, is because it's been 2 decades of this mentality, and then having it. And I do like that apparently Jamie Lee really pushed for that scene.
Good.
Specifically, and wrote a big chunk of it, because I think she was kind of speaking on behalf of every woman who has rolled her eyes so far back in their head that they thought they may not come back when someone says it's hard to be a straight white man right now, and you're like,
I mean, guys,
I can't.
It isn't easy. So the final thing we see is, of course, like, we see 10 seconds of Pete initiating his Christian comedy tour. I don't know where we're going to see this, but it was a very interesting button given everything else we saw, because it was one more example of probably a well-intentioned culture that still positions women in a way that's not societally progressive, right? So I don't know. It was quick. I don't know if there's much to say about the scene, but
I think just having the opening scene of him telling Jason that he's like, I think I'm gonna do this Christian circuit. Him being like, no, don't do that. And he's like, oh, okay, well maybe I won't.
Yeah.
Just kind of being submissive. And then after seeing, oh, this isn't the version of masculinity that I want to be. I love that was the button, because it was him saying, okay, I'm gonna break that cycle. I'm not gonna try to learn from somebody who clearly needs to work on themselves before they talk to everybody else and lecture other people on what to do, because he sees firsthand him doing it to Allie, when it's like, dude, you're bitterly sitting away from the screen, not even watching her while she's killing.
Right.
Like, this is your issue. I'm not going to continue to project that. Like,
Definitely.
I thought that was a kind of a cool note. Like, even if it is a little bit misguided, which is on brand for him.
For sure. Yeah.
And I thought it was kind of like I wouldn't say rebirth, but he went back to his roots, what he's comfortable with, and he starts saying, God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. Just kind of a reminder that, this is who I am, and this is cool, and like this is where I need to be right now. That's how I took it. I didn't take it any further than that.
Well, we'll see. The show's been pretty open-minded about religion, which I've appreciated, because I think a lot of comedies aren't necessarily, and Pete's always been someone who's, I think, been atypically religious compared to a lot of comics. So we'll have to see how the show handles it. I do make sure we have enough time for our special segments, but any more thoughts on the actual episode before we move on?
This might have been my favorite episode, like in the whole series
Of the show?
Yeah. Because this episode, you think Pete Holmes, you think all these comedians, and I think my one complaint with this show is that it's not hilariously funny. Like, it has its funny moments, but like when you list all the comics who are on this show, you would expect like, oh my God, I'm going to be laughing from start to finish, and that's not always the case.
Right.
It's like sometimes it's very like monotone and drawn out, and the storylines, I'm not saying they're boring, but they don't really go anywhere sometimes. But this is the first time like there was some like conflict, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah. Lenny, last thoughts, Lena, before we move on? Or?
I just thought it was really, really well done. And I did think that it had some really funny moments, but also showed that the life of a comedian is kind of sad sometimes. And that's indicative of that whole society. And it's like, I think it opened up a lot of doors, and I hope it's going to invoke some more conversation.
I do too. And speaking of conversation, I wanted to give Dov Davidoff, who's a really brilliant comic, the chance to not seem like a patriarchal douchebag. So for our segment, we're going to watch some of the actual actor / comic do some stand-up on Fallon.
That's awesome, because
I don't know. How do you guys want to play this? I feel like I've been thinking a lot about life and death. My buddy believes in heaven. And I asked him what his idea of heaven was, and he said, when I die, I believe that I'll be reunited for eternity with all of my family that passed away before me. And I thought, is that what we want? Do you want to be reunited with your family for eternity? If I die right now and see my whole family on a cloud and they're like, hey, Dov, I'd be like, hey! I'll stop by and all, but I'm not doing eternity over there. I think we can all agree the last 30 Thanksgivings have not gone smoothly, I don't know.
I think for the sake of time, I want to bring it down and move on. But I just thought it was important to show what a good actor he is, because clearly he's not.
I think that definitely shows that he's. This episode, I think, definitely shows his range, but it has to be so difficult for a comedian playing such a D-bag comedian where you're like, that's not me, man.
With the leather jacket.
And I did love that this clip was a late night thing. So it's like, if you were doing late night, you wouldn't think it was BS, man.
Right.
It's like, there you go.
Absolutely. I know, it's such a good point of look at the character who's disparaging late night doing a late night set. We're going to do some really, really quick news and gossip. Basically, I just want to let you guys know, this episode got a ton of coverage, and typically this show isn't necessarily breaking a ton of news, but because this episode was so timely and politically relevant, there's a lot of good articles you can read. I would check out Slash Film. Pete did a interview there that was really, really good. I know, Elena, you saw some good coverage too.
Yeah, there was some great stuff that there was an interview that TV Insider did with Jamie Lee that was really interesting, and then another one that I really liked. I believe it was
New York Times.
New York Times, yeah. New York Times did a great interview with Judd Apatow, basically just talking about how comedy is changing and how this episode came to be, and how it was really just kind of a progression of just them on the road to then leading into this Me Too
Cool.
It's a really great article. So
lots of really good articles. We'll post some of those in the comments below because we'd love to hear you guys kind of dialogue with us. But yeah, just it was neat to see the show getting a little more covers than it usually does, and I think it's owing to such a good episode. I don't think we have time for predictions this week, but what we'll do is when you guys say your Twitters, if you want to give one prediction that you either see for next episode or the rest of the season, go ahead and do that.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Josh Rodriguez. You can follow me at Twitter, Instagram at Josh_Rodriguez_. I think we're going to see some turbulence between Pete and Kat, and also Allie's going to come to the picture, making things a little more complicated.
I agree. Elena?
I'm Alana Jordan. You can find me on Twitter at Alana Jordan and on Instagram at Alana J. Jordan. And also, if you are in Hawaii, I'm going to be in Hawaii February 23rd through 25th, something like the weekend of that.
general area.
I'll be there for Amazing Comic-Con Aloha, so come up, say hello. And then
awesome.
Also you can check out relativitypodcast.com. It's a radio drama written by Lee Shackelford, who wrote some stuff for Star Trek Next Generation.
Cool. Are you in it?
I am.
That's awesome.
We're in our third season. I just got to record a bunch of season 3, so get caught up because they're
That's
about to
so
start
dope.
airing them.
I love scripted podcasts. I need to check that out. Guys, my name is Jeff Graham. You can find me on Twitter at Jeffrey C. Graham. I predict that we're actually going to see more of Jason, and I think we're going to see him grow a little bit. I think this show has a soft heart, and I think we're going to see some evolution from him.
I like that.
And if you guys want to catch me, I actually host the Bachelor after show, which I'm simultaneously very proud of and very ashamed of.
I kind of enjoying you today. I've been watching.
It's such a good show.
I know.
If you haven't seen the show, it's like shockingly one of the best television shows you can see, and I cover that. It's actually tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, so check us out there. And of course, we'll be back for Crashing, so we'll see you guys next Monday at 5 p.m. Thanks for tuning in.
Our founder, Keven Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.